I'm like getting an email from your accountant right before you're about to start a podcast.
Oh God, what they say?
Did you think I read them?
Busy week, dude.
Yeah,
Man, we've been having some fun, haven't we?
a lot of stuff.
You know, man, I gotta say, like, you know how we've been doing JavaScript long enough that it kind of goes up and down, and like, I don't know, there's these like periods of like innovation and there's like periods of stability. And I also find like my mood changes in terms of like eagerness to learn new things and then not, and just want to build and stuff. It's pretty fun right now to learn new things.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of cool stuff going on.
Yeah.
The React 18 is coming out soon. Just saw the announcement post yesterday for like the final, it's like a final beta or something like that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Dan was tweeting about it. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff. They've made some changes to the suspense component. I haven't seen what they are yet.
Nice.
Yeah, interesting though.
I think on a lot of my React apps, I've just been doing the latest or the
RC.
RC.
Yeah.
RC.
Yeah. I was doing that for a little bit and then like it broke imports and stuff. So I'll be excited when it's all squared away.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we have a million things to talk about and we have lunch here in about 45 minutes, but I think we should focus on Remix because we've been building with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think before we begin, I kind of want to say like, I wasn't really happy with last week's episode. I think it was like a bad episode. I think I was too critical on like Remix and Prisma. And so, yeah, I kind of felt like crappy about that and definitely wanted to take the time to actually build a Remix app. I don't want to be like, it's so easy to have hot takes on the podcast.
Yeah, that's true.
Do not want to be that way. So
yeah.
I want to use this episode to kind of course correct some of the last few weeks, some of the last few episodes. So,
cool. I like that. Yeah, it's fun. It's obviously like fun to have it and feel like it's just unfiltered opinions. We're just kind of speaking off the cuff. But yeah, when we kind of produce it and it comes out, it's also like our opinion has changed every like an hour for the last week. You know what I mean?
So true.
Wait, suspense is great. Wait, no, server-side rendering is great. What have we been doing for the last 10 years? Wait, no, I still want to do this thing. It's like, it's really interesting,
Yeah. It's tough with a podcast because like some people say, oh, I love it. It feels like a water cooler discussion.
Right.
And other people expect like, no, you need to be like
more
produced
polished,
and like, yeah. So it's
more concrete.
finding that balance it's hard. I mean, it's really hard.
Yeah. With that being said, I think we've both been having a lot of fun with Remix.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I did my Remix video yesterday. I'm editing it now. But yeah, just wanted to like, I kind of did this with Next, the first Next app I built. I just gave it a shot, kind of live. Flip on the camera, build for a few hours, see what comes out of it. And man, I actually pulled it up yesterday. And it's funny because it's 2 years ago that I made that video.
Wow.
And the things that were impressing me are things we take for granted now. The error modal was new. So like I had a missing import and it showed in the app that like you don't import this thing. And it was like I was blown away by that, because it was that kind of thing was pretty new. And now it's just, obviously I'll auto import it and it'll work. That stuff was kind of new at least for us at the time. And so it's fun to see that because it's easy, I think, especially because things like Remix are bringing back some patterns that have been around the web for a while, but to still realize like in so many little ways, things have gotten so much better for developers and it's pretty amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. How should we talk about Remix? Because we both built 2 apps. I guess you built 2. I built 1.
Yep.
I think we took different approaches or we had different goals in mind.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start just because I did it yesterday, and then it would be fun to see what you did because we kind of take different approaches too, as is characteristic of us.
Yes.
I like started foundations, wanted to read every word in the tutorial, and you just went right for it. But I think there's a lot to be said for that too, especially because. So I'll just talk about what I did, which was basically went through the jokes tutorial, which is like a CRUD app with users, and you build your own auth. Which is pretty straightforward. There's always a lot of moving pieces, but kind of once you get it set up, it feels good. And, I've done that enough before that I understood the moving parts, but it's still a lot, but it was nice to just have the code. And originally, and then you build the CRUD app and you use SQLite, local database, and Prisma as like the ORM. That was the first time using Prisma, so it was fun to have the tutorial there. A few times in the tutorial, they say this is not a Prisma tutorial, so if you need to reference the guides, you can, but they provided enough information that I didn't have to look at Prisma docs, which was nice.
Cool.
And having had experience with Rails and Active Record, I kind of knew at a high level what was going on there. So that was nice. Prisma also has like a npm command that like opens up your database in the browser, which is just great.
Yeah.
You know, then they have like a seeds file you use to create stuff, but it's also fun to just like, you know, I define a new joke model and I forget to run migrations or like db push. And if you run like Prisma, explore, what is it? The Prisma viewer thing.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't know the actual.
But when you pull up the Explorer, if your database is not in a good spot, it tells you, which is nice because I remember back in the day of Rails, like it's easy to forget to migrate, and you might get a weird error. Eventually in Rails they added an error message that says you have pending migrations, but this is just really nice UI and it tells you. So it's kind of a fun way to just check your database against state. And then if you want to create a joke, you can just do it right there.
Absolutely. I was working on just like, okay, a little tangent here. Last year or 2 years ago, I was working on a project that had to like ingest thousands of products. And like before we built the UI, before we built anything, I had to build the ingest part of that. And so being able to see the data, see the
without
relationships,
a UI built,
see how they link, be able to filter like, oh, did these things tie to the right category?
Yeah.
So yeah, really like nice touch dev tool, like, you know, so.
Definitely. So my original plan was to basically copy the Jokes app that I had because it uses basic session cookie auth and email password sign in, and then it has some CRUD stuff and just go from there. But they had this pretty new thing called Stacks. And I listened to a podcast with Kent C. Dodds on JS Party where he was talking about it, and he was saying it's new, but he's really excited about it. It's basically pre-configured with a bunch of stuff. And they have 3 stacks. It's like named after music genre. So it's like the blues, which is like the enterprise stack. So it's like production ready stuff. Then they have the indie stack, like for an indie hacker, but like indie music, right? And then they have grunge, which is like serverless. So it's like, you know, short running processes and all that good stuff. And so indie is like what we would, it's Rails.
I get why the blues and the indie thing, why the grunge.
Grunge is like cutting edge. Grunge. Okay. It's like you're living on the edge. You're like sharp knives. Like you're working with like whatever. You're doing like a planet scale thing. And you're using Lambda functions or Cloudflare workers. Like, you know, I didn't want to, that's all new to me. So
I also, as you're describing them, I need the techno stack, like,
right.
Like 160 beats per minute.
Right.
Where you just like, you don't read anything.
Oh,
you
God.
Just fly.
Yeah.
That's what I need.
What's the party in Miami? Yeah, there's Electric Daisy Carnival here. But what's the crazy techno party in Miami that like Armin van Buuren plays at and like Daft Punk?
Oh, I always hear EDC. But
yeah,
I think
EDC.
That's like a Vegas thing.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
A bunch of my biggest buddies go to that.
Yeah. I want to code with like flashing lights, people doing drugs in the closet. So no GitHub libraries allowed in unless it has fewer than 5 stars, you know. Anyway, so indie hack stack is like a Rails app basically, and it's pretty awesome because like 9 out of the 10 things that they have by default I wanted. So Tailwind is wired up.
They nailed it for you.
I didn't even have to set that up, which was great, and you still get the Tailwind config file. So all this stuff, again, another thing I think lessons learned is like they give you a bunch of code and you can change all of it as opposed to it being hidden behind a thing. And then you have, Rails, jQuery, Rails, form, Rails.
That feels less like Rails and more like kind of like starter template.
Exactly.
Or like a PHP.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
right.
Okay.
It's less like, I think especially back in like, other times we've wanted to make like the onboarding so seamless that you end up wrapping a library into like another library or an add-on to plug into whatever framework you're using so that the person, like I had like this Ember Tailwind thing, and eventually it was like, you realize that's not a good idea because that's another thing to maintain. And the person using Ember Tailwind is like having to understand your APIs as well as Tailwind. When really you just want to make it easy to add Tailwind the way you'd add to Ember, the way you'd add it to React or Vue or anything like that. So that's kind of the approach they take, which is nice because you can get rid of anything and change anything. But it has SQLite, and I was like, can you deploy SQLite? Turns out you can.
So
there's
where
some
are
way
where are you deploying
So I'm
to?
deploying to Fly.io, which is also what you do in the tutorial, and they also had the stack set up for us, so that was pretty cool.
So they must give you like some like
Persistent,
mount volume
yes,
or
exactly,
something. Okay, cool.
exactly. Because originally I was thinking I would set up a Postgres instance somewhere, passing my DB string, but this just had it, and apparently SQLite stores a lot of data.
Well, last week you were telling me how you needed globally distributed databases.
You're right. Now I'm writing.
Now
I'm going to do image uploads on a WordPress
actually
server.
building an app changes. Yeah,
that's true.
True for both of us.
That's true.
So true.
That is true. So that was nice. I really just wanted to build something. I mean, all in all, dude, it took 4 hours. It's pretty impressive, and I have it deployed. I mean, it was cool because we used to do this when we built apps, like
Weekend Warrior hypothesis,
nailed it. And it took me longer because I was explaining and reading and talking to video. If I had just been going, I would have had even more stuff done. But we used to do this thing when you start an app, like it's tempting to you like npx create remix app and you're running and then you just start adding features. But like I kind of like npx create remix app and then deploy it. Get it set up to Git, see it, and then you're in the flow. So there was something you told me about. There's some term you had for this, but it was like it's like the slice. It's like getting it done. So you don't wait. You don't push off all the integration concerns.
Also, too, you're like the integration iceberg, where like all these little things come up.
Exactly.
When you were saying that, I was thinking, oh, cool. You're starting at the end.
Yes. Yeah. Because I wanted to keep it simple, but I wanted to have a real thing when I was done.
This is where the Weekend Warrior thing is so important, because if it took you 3 days to get deploy working, then you're not
with a database.
Then you're done. You're never going to use this tool. But the fact that it's so easy to do that, and then you actually get to build the app in a day, in 4 hours.
Right. I wanted to use it at the gym this morning because it's for tracking my lifts. And there was one little thing that I couldn't get working. I couldn't get a migration to run on Fly, even though it's configured to do it. I still want to look at that with you today, but I had it working and I was going to use it today. But anyways, I'll get there. So yeah, you create it with the stack. You have all the stuff. Boom, you're off to the races. And then I wanted to immediately deploy it. And they have a great README with all these instructions. Basically, you sign up for a Fly.io account. You do it through your terminal. You sign in with GitHub. Done. You create a staging app. You create a production app. I just went to main and did production. But if you push to dev, it'll give you a staging branch, a build, deploy. And then you set up some keys. You add a key to the repository, which Fly gives you. And then they already have the GitHub action, and action was awesome, man. It's like, it was so cool. It runs it's V-test for unit testing, it's Cypress for end-to-end. The Cypress tests actually create a user and sign up.
Cool.
So the stack comes with the functionality of the stack. Actually, the stack is an app. It's a note-taking app. It has user registration, sign-in, auth. And then it has a note model that you can create notes.
I see what you're saying earlier, where you're saying they give you a bunch of code so they can wire up your login form, your registration, your how you store sessions, whatever.
Exactly.
And but then you can rip it out.
Exactly.
I kind of like it like as a maximum flexibility. You can see what your users like about it, what they don't like about it. It's easy to change, right? They can just push updates to those packs, and then maybe in years from now, if there was like a clear winner or clear feedback from users, you can kind of double down on a pattern, build it into
put a library into a roll the IPAs back into Remix.
But you don't have to commit to that right now. And the answer today can be like, we're not committing. We're not we need to get user feedback. So that's really cool.
Exactly. And, originally I was hoping for a bare bones thing because I wanted to really understand it all. And there's some things, admittedly, like I just took as a given. I didn't go back and read through all of the auth code, even though it was based on the joke stuff, which I did write. But, to really truly understand every line, it would have taken longer. But I was happy to just keep that. And then, basically I got that working, deployed, and I signed up on production on Fly and created some notes, and it all worked. And then I basically ripped out the notes routes and changed the homepage up and then started from scratch. But I kept the sign up and sign in stuff. Cool. And then that's when I started. So that first part took like about an hour, which is not a lot of time. And I was reading and understanding, but I had it all up. And then it basically took about 3 hours to build my little mini app. and explain things to the video.
So this indie pack came
Stack,
with
yeah.
Stack
Yeah.
came with like GitHub Action,
login,
Tailwind,
Tailwind, Prisma, this SQLite database. There's a user model that has all of like require current user ID, get current user, errors on certain login things. All of your logins has error handling. So if you sign up with an email that exists or you did a bad password, you'll see it in the form. So yeah, pretty awesome, dude.
Cool.
Yeah.
Does the enterprise stack, does that come with like Jira integration?
Yeah, it comes with like an Okta button.
I kid.
SSO, comment,
SSO.
not yet implemented.
SSO, yeah. It comes with SSO and Jira,
yeah. So the very first part was basically they have a splash screen with sign up or sign in, and then you sign in, and then you go to your /notes, and then if you're logged in, and you visit the home page. It says log out, and then it says view Sam Selkoff's notes, sam.selkoff@gmail.com's notes or whatever. And then you click there and you go to /notes. So the first thing I wanted to change was to make it like my fitness app, which is like the home screen either shows you log in or sign up, or if you're signed in, it just shows you your entries for your workouts or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that was the first thing I did. So that was like the first kind of moving bits around. So I changed like the redirect after you sign in to /. It's pretty easy. You know, they have like a get optional user hook that gives you either a user or not. And so right in the homepage, you know, just react. If you're a user, I get to render like all my other stuff. I move the header to the root, you know, and so this is like the first little taste of nested routing there. The header lives in the root part and the logout button conditionally renders there. I can use the hook there as well. It's great. Yeah, it's nice. Like, yeah, a lot of it, the server rendering stuff, you know, so like I have my fitness app in Next where I'm like, use current user, you know, you're having to think when you log in, okay, things are rerunning. My React app is re-rendering, but like maybe there's an effect that's calling router.push and all this stuff. And so like this hookup here reruns and then this one reruns. And like, I want to make sure everything happens at the same time. With Remix, it's like, it's all it feels very solid because when you sign in, you have an action that paints the whole screen. It's basically like an HTML form and a render. So there was some nice feeling of robustness, just general robustness, moving around the app with redirects that I feel like is harder to do on a pure client side model, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Even just thinking about the user, like you have a state where you are logged in, but you're rendering the app for the first time. So you don't actually know if you're logged in yet.
Right.
So like you are logged in, but you're going to have your first render without a login. And then so that's just harder. That's just harder to conceptually think through than like, no, before I render the app, I loaded the current user. So now when I render, I either have a current user or I don't. There's not like a transition or a state that I need to capture in my page load. Also just kind of, yeah, that's how a lot of web apps work.
That's how.
And so I think there's like familiarity points you get there.
Yeah, you're like refactoring and like moving, you know, logout buttons and use current user hooks, and like you're changing a redirect or adding a new page, but like you feel more confident in all the ways you can get there.
Yep.
You know, like we always say, when you expose a new route. Like if your website has 4 URLs and you add a 5th, you have to think about all the ways you can get there. And it's basically like factorial, right? All the paths through the app. But it's true, when you leverage web, HTTP, you're basically thinking in each route, there's the one way to get to this page. And then Remix handles whether you're actually doing a client-side navigation or a server-side, but conceptually it's the same thing. They run the loaders, they run the logic, and then paint the page. So it felt more robust. That's like a word I would use to describe it, where I changed the hierarchy, I changed the redirect URL, and then like every time, no matter how I got there, it worked. Yep. And I didn't have to think about it, which was really cool.
Nice.
So that was nice. And then I, again, don't have a ton of time with Prisma, but I basically created I have my data model. I did a little sketch. I have like a user that already existed. There's exercises with like a bench press or a deadlift, which aren't tied to a user. And then there's an entry, which belongs to a user on a day and points to an exercise. And that was like the only models I did. Eventually, I want to add sets. An entry has many sets, but for now, I just did like a text node. And basically created like at the index. So I started, the index was blank. I wanted to like create some entries in the Prisma UI and start rendering them, but I wanted to do the thing like the only way this app is useful is if you can actually create an entry. So that has to be the first thing, because when you first use it, there's no entries. So I created a entry/new route, and then made a form, and I was able to like copy most of the form from the note-taking app that they had. Really didn't have to look at the docs much. I mean, I had gone through the jokes tutorial, but like between the autocomplete and the example code, there's something nice about, there's like a note/new form right next to you in your editor you can just like crib from, and so that was fun. And then I simplified it down, and then I did that for my entry, and then the entry, I had a drop down that you had to, so at first I just wrote an HTML form. So select with like 2 static options, had the form as just HTML and Tailwind. And then I was like, all right, I want to wire this up. So to create an entry, it points to a user, which you can get on the server at the time of creation for the current user, which is how they do it in the note. And then you need to join it to an exercise. So the exercise I wanted to populate for the dropdown. And that I just wanted to seed with some exercises like bench, deadlift, squat, right? Because the user doesn't have to make those. So I went to the Prisma UI, created some exercises, and then I was like, I need to load these in order to run this form. So create a loader, Prisma.findMany.exercise.findMany, return it, use the loader data, boom, exercises.map, render an option, ID is the exercise ID. That was it. Didn't have to change anything else, submit it, and then I created an action. So then I had like dynamic data rendering the form from the database, which was just easy, right? Because it's all in the same file. And then, copy the action over to create the entry. And it was like, I was able to basically do all of that, create like a graph of data for the current user just by looking at the example code.
Nice.
And so then I went to the Prisma UI, saw the entry that pointed to the exercise, did that a few more times. And then on the home page, I want to display all entries. So just create a loader, Prisma.entry.findAll, where the user is the current user ID, and then iterate over them. So that was like the end of the video.
Really good pattern of I want to do this, create a form, create an action. Okay, I need to read it, create a loader. Okay, now I'm back on the home page. What do? I want to read it, create a loader. Like just kind of like very easy to get in a flow state.
Yeah.
Not having to think about, do I have a cache I can read from?
Yes.
So I think that's...
Dude, the thing that struck me the most...
I think there's a lot to take away from
this.
A lot.
The thing that struck me the most was like, compared to when I work on my fitness app, the challenge app in Next, which I'm using Firebase for all, especially when I was setting that up, and Hasura, you're working and then you're like, okay, I need to go to Hasura. So I open a web browser, go there, add some permissions, add some data relations, come back. This, I just had my editor open. It's Rails experience. It's all right there. There's no services. I'm not using any services that are, I am, but they're not leaking in the sense of like from the DX perspective. I'm just writing code in my repo. So that's
great. That anytime you don't have to alt tab to docs, no matter how good the docs are.
Right. Or another UI
flow state.
Yeah, totally, dude. So that was pretty awesome. And then, just git push and the GitHub Actions set up to deploy and everything. And it all worked, except I needed the migration. Basically my production site says trying to read from tables.entry. It doesn't exist. So I know what the problem is. And the deploy script is supposed to migrate on Fly.io, which is a pretty cool site. I had never really heard of it before Remix. But for some reason it didn't work, so I'll just have to figure that out. But otherwise, that was basically it. So
cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. I would say the biggest thing is like just that staying in the editor, and just all the APIs were like very pleasant to use.
Dude, you got your app done in a day.
Yeah,
it's all that. Like you can say whatever you want about anything, but if you can ship an app in a day. People build apps on the weekends. Now they're going to be super jazzed when they come into work on Monday.
Yeah.
So building an app in a day is just perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, it's perfect.
And I love it. Still felt like playing with React. So one of my favorite things when I started with like Next and create React app and all that stuff and making hooks and using services like Hasura was like I could just, use current user, use SWR. I'm staying in that file and that component. Whereas Rails, you're like, okay, build the UI, submit a form. All right, find the controller, implement a create method, do all the things. Okay, go to the database, right? You're kind of jumping all around. But the APIs in Remix, even though you're writing server and client code, because you just are exporting functions in the file, it still had that playfulness to it, which I liked a lot.
Nice.
That was probably my favorite part of it, actually. You're using a lot of Remix APIs, but at the end of the day, you're also writing a lot of React, and it kind of feels like very React-y. So, nice. So that was the main ones. I mean, we have a million more things to say, but you want to talk about the app that you built?
Yeah. So my approach was very different. I based on our conversation last week, you kind of led me towards some stuff that Remix is all about, server rendering. Basically, all the stuff you just talked about. You block the render until your loader completes, and then you get a render with all the data. So the data loading is outside of React, so you don't have to deal with the is loading state in React base. So that's how I would describe it.
Right.
So the idea sounds interesting, but I wanted to see like, okay, what does it look like to build an SSR app in Remix, because that's what's going to tell you to build. And then what does it look like to build an SSR app in another React framework? And I want to build those two things side by side. So I use Remix and Next, both in SSR. And I want to come away with two different answers. One is this SSR pattern something that like we've just been like kind of dismissing over the last few years? And then two, in what ways does Remix make building an SSR app easy for you as a developer? Like, so if I'm building this side by side in Next, what are the things that go really, really well in Remix? And I didn't know what they were, but I was sure that I was going to find something, right? Because a framework that's promoting SSR is probably going to give you a bunch of SSR goodies. So I built like a blog post at, every developer's favorite intro app. I built like a blog post editing thing. So get a list of blog posts, view a blog post, edit a blog post. I wanted to make it so you could view all the list of blog posts and read blog posts. But when you went to the edit form, if you weren't logged in, you would get a message saying you're not logged in. You need to log in to edit this. And then once you're logged in, you can edit it. And what I did is I built, since I'm familiar with Next.js, I built the page in Next.js first, and then I went off and built it in Remix, and then kind of compared the two.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was actually a great way to learn. It was a great way to learn Remix because I'm familiar with Next, so I can kind of answer all the questions that how should this work in Next, and then go build it in Remix, compare the two, be like, oh, okay, I should actually change this over here or that over there. So I was really happy with that.
That's cool.
Also, too, like you can see what a new tool is giving you, right? If
you're holding everything else constant, basically.
Yeah, and if you end up with like the same code in both apps, you can be like, okay, I'm not understanding what this is giving me. But if you end up with like, wow, it's so much easier in this version, really good way to learn.
Yeah. That's cool.
I forced myself with Next to only use SSR. So
get server-side props.
Get server-side props, and then basically like submitting data to API routes. No client, no SWR, no client-side caching tools. This isn't really a comparison of like Next versus Remix, because I'm kind of taking Next and saying like let's say Next is a Ferrari and Remix is a Lamborghini. I'm basically taking Next and saying like you can't drive over 20 miles an hour. But the idea is because I'm familiar with Next, it's going to help me understand the differences of these two things.
Like you were saying, hold it constant.
Yep. So I guess with Next, I had never really pushed like this idea of like get server-side props. I knew it existed. I think we had like one project that had one route with it, but other than that, like it's not my go-to tool for building pages in Next. So the very first page was a page that lists all blog posts So a React template that, maps over posts and renders LIs with and links to each post. And I did the data fetching in get server side props. Pretty straightforward. Went over to Remix, did the same thing, data fetching in a loader, and the React template was pretty much exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, pretty much exactly the same. But,
and you're running them both locally, and you're using the same Hasura backend.
The same Hasura. I thought
that was cool too.
Exact same Hasura backend for both. Yep.
So you're making GraphQL requests in your server side loaders.
Yes. Cool. Yep. And just because I have already have that tooling set up, so I didn't want to set up a new database or anything like that. So that was great. Then I click a link to load a blog post, and basically the same thing. Get server side props on the Next side, loader on the Remix side, React template for both.
So they feel very similar. When you click around and stuff, and when you're building them and saving and the refresh and all that links and stuff, it's all basically
it's all the same. Yeah.
Back forward button, refresh, and the server side thing is blocking all that basically.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yep. They both they're both in one file. They both are easily readable.
And then once you click on those links, when the JavaScript is hydrated, they both become client-side navigations, right? That just block on that. Yeah.
They will get their props from the server, I believe.
So you won't see the browser Chrome loading like you would on a PHP app. So when you click a link on a PHP app, the browser knows it's loading the page and it starts showing it, and then. But in these cases, you don't.
I don't. Okay. Not something
I noticed that.
Okay. Not something I looked for. And then also, too, I was running locally.
It's fast.
It was it felt like both apps just had data right there.
Yeah. Cool. Nice.
So then the next page was the login. You click the edit button and you're not logged in. So I want to show the login form. So I start implementing this in Next, and I use Firebase auth. So I'm okay, how would I implement this? Well, I have a use auth hook that returns a current user. And if I render that, I call that in React. And then if there's no current user, I render the login form. If not, I show the post. But right now there's no current user. So I render.
But you're doing that from the React side?
Yes, okay. Yes, because I have this use auth from Firebase. So I'll kind of talk about this a little. So render the login form. There's no current user, so I go to log in and I fill out the form. I click submit. And next, now I have a form on submit that's going to call sign in, which is a function you get back from use auth. It's going to sign the user in, and so now I have a user. But this is an SSR app, so I need some way for my server to know who the user is. So when the server's generating pages, it knows who the user is. So Firebase has this concept built in. They have this idea of you sign the user in on the client, and you send they have a little thing in their docs how to do this. You sign the user in, you take the user's token, you send it to your server. The server validates the token using the Firebase APIs, and then Firebase also has another API called create session cookie, I believe they call it. And what this does is this generates a cookie that you can hand back to the browser. So now every request between the browser and your server is going to be authenticated, and your server can now validate these session cookies through another Firebase API.
I see.
So the idea is you do the login on the client, and then you basically post some data to your server. Your server gets a cookie. It can give the browser. Now all future communication between the browser and your server has a cookie that your server can verify who the current user is. And so this was fine.
And that means you can server render.
You can now
user specific data.
Exactly, because every request
and
is
auth state based on things. Yeah.
So then I go off to Remix and I start to implement this, and I kind of end up with a similar thing where I have a Remix form that has an onSubmit that's doing client side login, that's getting the user, that then is taking the user's token, posting it to the Remix server, and the Remix server is then sending a cookie down. And I was okay, this is cool. And then I pull them up and I compare the two, and they're pretty much the same. And then I was this is kind of like, wait, hold on. Like Remix is all about SSR and it's all about forms that submit data to the server. And in my very first Remix form, I'm writing something that's like calling onSubmit. And I was like, this doesn't feel like, it feels like
off the happy path.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, so there was like, I was kind of like, there was like some tension here where it was like, well, but Firebase is telling me to do this. But if I was writing a Rails app, like I could just post a username and password to the server. So this was good. Like I was kind of got both written and looking at them. I was like, no, I'm actually going to like, let's delete the Remix one and try again with posting the username and password to the server. So I do that. I post a username and I build a form, like Happy Path Remix form, that posts a username and password to the server. Server code then logs into Firebase.
Using the Node SDK from Firebase.
Which was a little, I found some GitHub issues where some people are like, I don't want to do this. But then I found another one where a person that worked at Firebase was like, yeah, you can do this. It's totally fine. So I was like, okay, I think this person no longer works there, but they used to. If they're saying it's if they're
they got fired for telling people
no. If there's someone that's saying this is okay, this is okay.
No, they have a whole Node section on their docs. I mean, I think people can write Node servers that use Firebase. Just Node, not even a web front end.
You can.
You know?
You're
just saying if you click like get started with Firebase for my web app, they're going to try to nudge you towards client side.
Firebase does say, do you do the thing that I originally did? Right. That's why I did it, because I found it there. But
and it gives you reactivity if you're on the client with it. Like if you have the Fire,
but let's even say you're using something like Rails here. Like you're not using like React. It just, you do the login on the client, you send the token to the server creates a session cookie.
I see.
But again, like you
wanted your Remix code to be more. Yeah.
I'm learning about SSR, right? Like if I'm learning about SSR, my very first form has an onSubmit. I'm like, I'm just like driving off road. Like
Right.
Anyway, it was fine. It was a quick refactor to do the login on the server. So the server logs in. The Remix server, I log in on the server, create the session cookie on the server, and then send the session cookie back down to the browser. So now all future requests are going to be authenticated between the browser and the Remix server. So
nice.
Yeah. And then I went back.
Then you were able to remove all notions of Firebase from your client side code. Basically, the client bundle shouldn't have any
the
Firebase,
client,
which was one of their points.
Exactly. The client bundle does not have Firebase. Then I went back to the next app and I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's do the
same thing.
Yeah, we have to do the same. If we're doing it in Remix, we have to do it next. And so then, like kind of realize here, like, wow, the capital F form is really nice, because in the next app, I still needed an onSubmit handler that then posted data to my API route.
Because you need to create an API route. There's no convention around
handling
like post request from the client for a specific route. Or form.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I still end up with this this onSubmit handler. I wasn't able to remove that, where in the Remix side, that just disappeared.
That's cool.
There's a lot like how like, okay, I'm taking the form, I'm serializing it as JSON, I'm sending it off to the API route. The API route is going to like respond with like status okay if the login worked, or it's going to respond with like JSON errors if they're like, invalid username and password. What happens if something goes wrong in onSubmit? Like what happens if like something goes wrong and
user navigates away, right? You press the button. You press the button a couple,
right? Yeah. So that now you can like, okay, good. Now it feels like this felt good, because it's like, okay, I'm on the Remix happy path. I'm actually seeing the difference. Like, what are the tools? Again, I want to answer this question. What are the tools that Remix gives you?
Right.
Kind of had a little fun with this. I was like, I don't want to redirect the user to a login page, and I don't want to post to a login page and then have like a redirect back. So like I've used this like fetcher API in Remix that lets you just render your login form on any page you're on. So if you're accessing an auth page, I can keep the URL the same.
Oh, cool.
Render the form. When you post, you're posting to login still.
Right, because the form has the action, but you can use that form anywhere.
And if there's an error, I don't have to change the URL. So like I was doing this thing where
did you use like a catch error for that in the login form?
No. The Fetcher API just gives you all this.
The Fetcher gives you got you.
The Fetcher API, like their example is like you have a newsletter sign up form. You want that on all pages and you don't want it to affect navigation. So like when they submit it, there should just be a little message that says like, thank you for signing up.
Right. Cool.
Anyway, so that was fun. And also like, it's fun where you get something working and then you're like, I want to try to do this. I want to try to do this.
See if you can figure it out. If there's an API for it.
So I had both these working in Next and Remix, and you can really start to see that Remix is just like once you submit a form, you are in your action. Yeah, you're just there.
Yeah,
and you delegate all that in between. You don't get to describe how we get from the form to the action. You just delegate to us, and we figure out all the in between. So really reminding me of like it's a declarative API. Yeah. It's like you go into when you're writing an onSubmit handler. You are now responsible for describing everything that happens on submit, and there's no flexibility that the framework can give you because you have to describe everything. So it's like going into a restaurant and ordering a salad. When you say I'd like a salad, there's tons of flexibility that the kitchen can do, right? They can pick how many lettuce leaves, how many carrots, what types of lettuce, there's flexibility there. But when you, if you go into a restaurant and you say like, I would like a bowl with 5 pieces of lettuce, 2 carrots, where you describe all the steps you need to perform. There's no flexibility. What happens if what happens if the restaurant only has like 4 pieces of lettuce?
Right.
Like they can't, you've just said, I need these things. So really made me realize that like when you do things in onSubmit, you're now describing everything that needs to happen. Where with Remix, you just submit the form and they can change how your form gets submitted and ends up on the back end. And
that's the thing. So I feel like the steps you do in the action could be exact. Let's take an easy case where they're exactly the same thing. You create a user and then you send an email and then you respond success true. Like let's say those are the 3 steps in your form submission, right? Mm-hmm. Those are imperative in the sense that they're what to do. And let's say you had a handle submit on the client that did those things using like services, but then you also in the Remix version, you have an action and you do those 3 steps there. Mm-hmm. Is what you're saying that the part that's declarative, because both those are imperative, but the part that's declarative is how you get from the form to the action.
Exactly.
And all of the async stuff that can happen, canceling, submitting twice, renavigating, refreshing. You have to think about that in a client-side rendered case because you have to say, if this is still valid, if this request is still valid,
piece of the salad
is the transition. So I like the way Kent phrases on the podcast was that he said Ryan Florence doesn't describe Remix as like full stack or front end or back end. They describe it as center stack because the point of it is exactly what you're saying. I think you're like dialing into like maybe the main benefit of like really embracing their patterns and architecture, which is they want to help you cross the HTTP chasm. And so if you use a form and an action and Remix's form leverages HTTP, then you've taken care of like a lot of these problems. And so you have a declarative way it's like to cross that chasm. Yeah. And they can automatically handle cancellations. And like I was saying in my version, all the paths to each of these combinatorial potential states of your app where you have all these routes interacting with each other. If you can, the chasm is the hardest part. And now they've given you a declarative way to link and load data and a declarative way to mutate and redirect. So now that part is like done, which is pretty cool.
Dude, one thing here, again, it's like subtle declarative thing, but your action on your server has to do something. Like
has to return to
it just has to do something. Like it has to like it makes a database call. It sends data to a GraphQL server. It's doing something. And if there's an error there, if it throws, you now have a server response that you send down to the client and the client can react to that. With onSubmit, you don't have that.
Yeah.
onSubmit doesn't have to do anything.
Yeah, no, that's
So there's just a lot of it's like a lot of little paper cuts, a lot of little states that just kind of magically disappear. And the fact, like, I shouldn't be describing how to take data out of a form, serialize it, and send it to an API route.
If the browser already knows how to do that.
Yeah, that's like that's not what I'm interested in here. That's the stuff I'm just going to skip over, and that's where errors and bugs leak. So that was a big.
That's cool.
I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot that we can learn from this. So once I had this working, I went back to my Next app. I did the same thing in Next, where I had kind of getting back on the comparing the two apps. Same thing in Next, where I submit the data to the server does the login, and the server sets a cookie. So now all the Next SSR things are auth. Big takeaway here was just a lot more glue code when I'm not using a framework like Remix.
Because you have to make an API route, and then you have to
the
serialization, like you have to make a decision about how to send the data over.
That's it.
The API, how to read the data.
The API route didn't bother me because I'm still making an action. They look exactly the same. It was more that I have to go from onSubmit, and now I just take on all the responsibility of what happens on submit. There was one more thing.
And then if you wanted to redirect, that would be more code as opposed to just returning a response that redirects. Right. Like if your onSubmit gets a response that says it's a 304 or whatever. 301 with a redirect, you'd have to call like router.push or something like that, right? It wouldn't just work.
Oh yeah. This whole idea.
So that's that's more steps that you have to think about that the browser and the framework's not. Exactly. Which is very declarative, returning a redirect.
So one thing that came out from this, so I write the Remix app. I'm looking at the Next app, this imperative step. And I'm like, I should have like a use form. I should have a use form that's like a declarative version.
In your Next app.
In my Next app that's like use form, and I can point it at an action. Like I can point it at an API route.
Right.
And then when I submit the form, I can call a submit handler. Like I can call a submit handler that comes from use form.
Right.
Basically, like, can I hide all these imperative steps behind a convention? It's interesting that like I didn't, when I was first writing the Next app, I never thought I needed that. I was just like, I'm submitting a form. I'll do onSubmit, and I'll send the username and password to the server. And then I see the Remix version, and I go back. I'm like, oh wow, I really want to write use form now. I just want to copy all the declarative bits here. Like, what happens when the form errors? Like, I shouldn't have like a new
error state.
Set errors equals like response dot errors. Like I should just derive my use form should do that, and then my use form hook. So this is where I was like, there's a lot to learn here. There's a lot to learn from these ideas. So like even like you could write something like
even if your client side rendering world, which is not the Remix architecture, there's things abstractions and generalizations that you could apply.
It's kind of like I was like, like you probably shouldn't be writing a lot of fetch code in your React app. So you should be using use fetch, because use fetch can, first of all, it can like just hide its implementation. So it can add things like abort controllers without you ever knowing. It kind of reminded me of that. I was like, of course I shouldn't be doing onSubmit. I should be doing like a use form that can bake in all these things. You can't double click submit. The thing here isn't that like, I could just do that and have the same thing that my React app has. First of all, I can't just do that. That's a lot of work.
Remix app.
That my Remix app. I can't just do that. That's a lot of work. But the second thing, I think the really interesting thing is I didn't ever think to go down that road until I did it in Remix. And I love when frameworks guide you.
Teach you things you didn't know you needed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Teach you things you didn't know you needed. Exactly. So that was, I think that answered the second question of like, what tools does Remix give you to make this SSR world that you're going to be working in easier?
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool.
That's really neat, man. And it reminds me some of their materials, the resource they've been putting out. They say ultimately their goal with their company, which is Remix and other things they do, is to help people make better websites, whether they use Remix or not.
Cool.
So I think it's like they're doing their job well, because like even though we have experience using server-side frameworks and using the web for so long, it's nice to be reminded of what it gives you. And even if you end up doing that, it's like this is how you should be thinking about this, whether you're using Remix or not.
Right.
You know?
I should be right. If I'm writing a
you're
React
writing
app,
a web
I
app.
should be
Here's how the web
thinking
works.
declaratively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is how you cross the HTTP boundary. So emulate that, regardless if you're building in, Canvas app with Svelte or whatever you're doing. For the parts that cross HTTP and are posting and linking, that's how you want to think about it. So pretty awesome.
Cool. Just to wrap up, the
Yeah.
edit page where you actually get the form to edit the blog post once you are logged in. It was kind of like the same thing as a login page, just more imperative code ended up in my
API routes.
In my
in your,
not in the
submit,
API, in my
onSubmit.
onSubmit.
Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then the remix one was just form action. And like, come on, I'm editing a blog post. Do I need more than a form and an action? So like, also just, this is all. Anytime you're doing like set is error, like that should be an indicator to us that like
you're not thinking as declaratively as you could be.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We're imperative, and like
Yep.
React really shines when you're declarative.
Yep.
And so what is a declarative API? This
Yep.
set state is imperative. And so how can I avoid that? Like how can I avoid set state? What is a new hook I can make? Even if it's even if it's just me hiding the set states behind a hook.
Right. Use async function or something like that.
It's still like this idea of like the hiding the imperative bits.
No, because it nudges you because it's so easy to forget the edge cases.
Yeah.
If you're doing set is loading and all this stuff and then you navigate away,
you do my non-remix app, the Next app, if I double click a form,
you're done.
I don't
know what happens.
Exactly. I'm not done. I can't tell you what happens. And so it was I think that was the biggest thing, like just the form stuff.
Yeah,
I really
form
liked.
Stuff. That's awesome.
I went back and I did kind of the same thing you did. I made a header with like the user in it, and the nested routes are awesome. That was like, if you've never used nested routes, you're gonna love them. Like they're amazing. For me, that was less interesting because I came from Ember. So
for me, it's super interesting. I have my next feature in my app I want to build. I cannot wait because I like it's like the Matrix. Let me I know exactly where everything is going to go.
Let me finish here. Like I knew, I'm coming from Ember. I knew what nested routing is. Right. I knew how awesome it was. So I was like, this is exactly what I expected. Yeah, it was,
as opposed to the form stuff, which was like more mind blowing because it was just.
It was more like...
It was new. It was more novel.
Yeah, and I looked at the old code that I literally wrote like 10 minutes ago and was like, oh, wow, look at all those mistakes you're making.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah, so I liked it. I was using like GraphQL, which we kind of touched on. So I was able to just like, whatever I would normally do in like an onSubmit handler, I was able to like bring it up into an action. So there wasn't like, I felt like I could, I didn't get like a lot of I know a lot of people talk about like the benefits of like using a database like you were talking about using the database, and I didn't get to experience any of that.
But it didn't
stuff.
like slow you down. I mean, you didn't feel like it was awkward or clunky.
No,
just await GraphQL requests. Boom.
Yeah. I think it'd be fun to build like you're using GraphQL, like what is like the CSR version of this, because that can use GraphQL. What is the Remix SSR version of this, because that can use GraphQL.
Yeah.
So it allows me to kind of hold more things constant.
Yeah. Well, that's and that's what I'm interested. We're going to wrap up here pretty soon, but just I'm interested in like, so kind of like you were trying to like pigeonhole the Next app into the Remix pattern to see how far it could go with it. I'm curious about taking the Remix app and doing the things that I would normally do in Next or Create React app with client-side rendering. So like on my fitness app, I have like, you can tap on the person's picture and it shows like their summary. That loads data. So yeah, just be curious. Like, what would I do there in Remix? You click on a button, you show a modal, the route doesn't change. So I've already have a loader for the page.
I think this is where you want a fetcher, so you can have a
fetcher.
Yeah, you can have.
And would it hit a new endpoint?
It's a new endpoint that returns data, but it doesn't force navigation.
Right.
So,
where would I put the loader for that?
the loader would be in the new route.
So there's a route that doesn't render anything?
Well, so this is the thing. That's what I did. Like my login route just does login. It also returns the login component because I wanted to have something available at that URL since I was making it. But I don't, again, I like was flying 1,000 miles an hour. I don't know.
EDM music playing. Right?
I don't know. I think with yours, we could come up with the requirements, but
so that's, anyways,
Fetcher is the idea of I need to load data
without
or send
navigation.
data and without navigation.
Gotcha. Cool.
They say something in their docs where like, you probably don't need fetchers. I was like, do you want me to use fetchers? Because that's how you get me to use fetchers.
Right, exactly. This is only for Jared. Use Formic. Dude, I love use Formic.
Right. But no, it was cool that you can do the you can do a form without navigation.
Yeah.
And you're
still getting the benefits of the declarative. The boundary is being handled for you. Remix is handling the cancellations, the in-between states. But you get a rich client interaction.
I've got a few Twitter DMs going with some buddies. Roman, one of them, talking about like just what's it like to build Remix apps. And the thing we all agree on that everyone's super excited about is like, it feels like PHP apps. It feels like PHP apps from like the early 2000s.
Yeah, but you get to use React.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
But like just
my files have React in them. I can make a component with a button that has a loading, whatever. But like you're doing PHP. It's which is cool.
There's so much that there's so much that was awesome about PHP. You're submitting data and then you're just re-rendering the form with errors populated this time. It was a thing that felt like we had to give up when we
went all in on SPAs.
Yeah, and it's never thought I'd be so excited about like
forms and
just
links.
Like forms and PHP. But if you tried to make this argument to me like a few years ago, I'd be like, there's so much more we get from using React, so we can't we just have to table that stuff. But they're like definitely changing a lot of my assumptions about this.
But you get to use React. I mean, I think you wouldn't be saying this even if you had a framework that was doing it this well, if like your server code was like back to Ruby code or something like that. Like,
of course, I would say, I would throw the baby out with the bathwater. I would say yes, there's so much you get from using HTTP, but then you have to render in these server template languages and you want to make a drop down and you can't and you're stuck. So guess what? We have to use too many things begin with re. We have to use React, which means we have to do all this client-side data fetching, which means that all the server data fetching, server rendering that we loved from PHP, we have to work without. But that assumption has fully been challenged and fully been changed. And also too, like, dude, I did these 2 apps in like, I don't know, 3 hours. Yeah. And I was like creating a new Hasura instance and adding permissions. So like there was like there's a lot of moving pieces here and like very quickly changed my assumption. So
that's awesome, man. It's impressive. Dude, if you look at my form page for a new entry, it has a drop down that is built using a list. It's using React to generate the HTML, but it's select an option. The path to upgrade that to an autocomplete, the data for the exercises is coming from use loader data and it's loaded in the server loader. But I have the data in React. I could pass that to my autocomplete widget. Yeah. It's literally a 0 upgrade pane, even though it's basically server rendered HTML. So the simplicity of loading data, loading the exercises for the form and rendering a select with options that you get from PHP or Rails, and then your product manager asks you, can we make that a search complete? Okay, stimulus time. Let's put a thing here and create a new JavaScript file and mount it. I'm going to read, where do I put the data in order to share it with React? It's in React. It's from a hook already. There is zero friction for the progressive and enhancing it to any rich client React component you want.
Really good point. In Rails, it's literally select option HTML.
You're like, no, I can't.
And remix it to React. So the jump from simple React drop down with HTML to advanced React drop down plugin is so short. It's shorter. Yeah.
There is no jump. You would think getting server rendered data into a list of options and then somehow getting that you need that state in the client. So you need the client state manager, and then you need to put that into React state. So you need to set state. I didn't set state exercises. I never did like I didn't create exercise state, set exercises. Okay, now we have them. Now we can initialize like the drop down. It's just there in a hook. It's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah. I'm really excited to see what I think this is like. It's like kind of like a mind virus. It's just gonna it's gonna stick.
It's like the thing from the Wrath of Khan that goes in your ear, the Star Trek movie.
I think I'm really excited to see how
the community ecosystem respond.
Yeah, I think I think that if I'm working on a Next.js app, I'm probably like the Next.js apps I work on today are mostly going to be still using the client-side data fetching, but there's always going to be that, okay, well, how would you do this in an SSR world, and what do you get?
And how can you model that in your current app, even if it's CSR?
And so I really hope this just pushes not just Remix developers, but all of React to let's generate HTML on the server, send it down to the client, but still have like block SSR. SSR is the best word the best phrase I can use to describe it. Anyway, that was a really jumbled way of saying I really hope all of React moves to SSR, and I hope that these are ideas that there's just like
they're good. There's a lot of good ideas.
There's really good
ideas. Lots of lessons that the community can learn,
and it's every React developer is like aware of these patterns and is able to use these patterns. What you said, like Remix's mission is to make people write better apps,
better websites, whether they use Remix or not.
Yeah,
by learning about HTTP and what the core. Yeah, it's like what the web's been built on for decades and how PHP apps work. But even though we know how PHP apps works, you still forget because you're like, oh, now my API just gives me JSON. I'm basically writing an iPhone app in the browser. But like you can do that. You can do that, but it's hard. And if you just leverage how HTTP works, even if you're in the client-side rendered world with your abstractions, you can get a lot farther. You can do a lot more and remove a lot of code and bad paths through your app if you model it. I'm convinced, I mean, it's still jury's out, but I think there's a lot of, you could make some abstractions like you're saying that use the mental model from all these Remix APIs, which is basically the mental model of HTTP APIs, HTTP and how it works, and drastically improve your client-side rendered apps.
Yeah, I think that would be like an awesome
exercise.
Lesson.
Yeah.
Just awesome. Like everyone writing a React app now thinks of React like this.
Right.
Feels like a tool that we've known it has existed for like 20 years, and I don't know, just threw the baby out with the bathwater.
I think it's because I think that's like it's easy to kind of like that's kind of we should have like been learning all that.
We should have just it was. I'm really happy these ideas are being pushed on.
It's the reason is because they made them so palatable. They presented them in a way it doesn't say, oh, you really should be using post requests with the form. So you should go to open a controller file and implement a RESTful route. No, they acknowledge that the DX benefits of just working in one language, working in one file, playing with Legos and React is what people want. It's fun to do. It makes your day-to-day development like super fun and awesome. And so you are willing to give up a lot of stuff because you want that. And they said, well, how can we bring the stuff we know you should have that's so good about the web, but still meet you where you're at, which is like writing React in a single file with these like really simple function APIs. And it's like, once they did that, then it's like, oh, okay, I'm there, you know? Mm-hmm. So pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah. Just before we go, I worked on an app last year where we worked on this together, where like you were in charge of the front end and I was in charge of the back end. Mm-hmm. And my full-time job was building an API server. Mm-hmm. And it was a requirement for the project, but it was still my full-time job to build out an API server. And when I was writing the Remix app,
you're building an app. You're building
one app, and there's no API server. There's just no okay, maybe there is in the implementation, but like there's no API server. And so I think if you're someone that thinks like a React app absolutely has to have an API server, Remix is gonna gonna blow your mind.
All right, cool. It's a great place to end it. Hey, I'm sure we'll be talking about more of this stuff next week because we've been talking about it nonstop for the last 2 weeks. But hope you enjoyed that. If you stuck around, and yeah, that's it. Let's go get some burgers at Emily, which is one of the best burgers if you're ever in New York City. I'm excited about it.
I'm getting the pizza.
Oh, nice. All right, we will see y'all next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.